again, everyone, it's me, MadameMacabre, and welcome to another video. So, it feels like it has been ages since I have done one of my good old story times. Not a scary story time. Well, actually, no, this one is a scary story time. Just different kind of scary. This is one from my personal life, and since quarantine has me losing my mind here up in Washington State, I'm pretty sure everywhere is dealing with quarantine right now. So, that's great. I'm stir crazy. I'm losing my mind, and I miss socializing. So, I'm gonna socialize with you guys. So, I'm gonna share a story with you guys that I never actually got around to sharing in all these years. But it's something that I don't even know what it was that reminded me of it. Maybe there's a lot of stuff similar that's going on lately in other drama and tea stuff that made me think of it. I don't know, just it reminded me of something that I kind of had forgotten about a pretty long while ago, and I never talked about it because I felt really bad about the situation because I was young and dumb, and I felt bad because I was made to feel that way. But as an adult, looking back, I was absolutely in the right. I feel no shame about what I did. I feel I did the right thing as a mature grown adult. And there's a cat climbing up from the depths of the bed back there. Hi, where did you come from? He's here for the tea, sis. Okay, so this story, we're gonna open a little time capsule. Take ourselves back to about, I wanna say maybe the year of about around 2013-ish. And I'm getting dinged. This is super professional video. So probably around 2013, back when I was first starting the seer, and I have a cattail in my face. He's here for the tea. So back when I was literally just starting my online stuff with DeviantArt, and I had sort of just really gotten into the swing of things with my old comic, The Seer. This was, mind you, back when I was still in college. So, like, fresh out of high school, in college, back at the time when my comic was just... Kitty. Honey. This is my life now. Cat hair and sadness. We're gonna tell the story, okay? We're gonna tell the story. Back when I was fresh, brand spanking new to DeviantArt, and I was just starting the Seer, the Creepypasta community was very, very different. Very different indeed. We were all a whole lot younger. There was a whole lot more drama and things because we were all kids. You've got hair all over me, buddy. You do. You got hair all over me. This is Apollo. He likes to put his hair all over me. You're distracting me, sir. So, I was on DeviantArt, and way back then, I had made friends. Let's see. I'm gonna change everybody's name in the stories just to cover that end. So I'll call him Dan. So I met this guy named Daniel. Now, back in the day, this was when there was the big trend of everybody wanted to make their own creepypasta character. And Dan just happened to have created a character that was getting a little bit popular. He had some people following him, liking his character. He was getting better known and all that. Now, mind you, back in the day, what constituted being like really big and popular was a lot different nowadays. Nowadays, you have to have massive numbers to really be considered big. But I think he had around like 500 watchers or something, which back in the day was a respectable amount. Like nowadays, you gotta have thousands for people to like really care, but I digress. He was doing pretty well for himself back in the time as far as our much smaller community. In our community, that was crazy. I had befriended him. My comic was fresh and just taking off. I want to say this was back when my channel was just around creeping up on like 50,000, so that was like crazy. I timed that right because I remember there was one other comic, like Pasta Monsters, that had just like canceled or gone on hiatus or something when I had started doing mine, so it filled that need. And that's a lot of like internet like stuff, dudes. Like you can work hard and like have it screw you over, but if you time it right, yay, you win the lottery. It's dumb. I'm going all over the place. Quarantine's melting my brain. Anyway, I had to make notes for myself so I could remember literally where I'm going with this. That's right. So I met Daniel, and Daniel introduced me to his friend Blaine, we'll call him. Blaine, it was a little bit interesting that he was best friends with Daniel. Blaine was significantly older. I should mention Dan was about 15 at the time of this story. So I had befriended him. I was about 18, and he was a 15. Even to me at 18, he seemed like, aw, sweet baby. He's little brother. That's so cute. Blaine was a 23-year-old man who was saying he was best friends in the whole world with little Daniel. 18-year-old lizard brain didn't process that as weird. Mind you, I was a very sheltered child, so it took me until getting much older to realize some serious red flags and things. But I digress. So he had mentioned that Blaine was his best friend. He thought he was really cool. He looked up to him. And then when I got to meet Blaine, he was really into photography, and specifically goth fashion. Now, back in this time period, I was a little bit more into the little edgy emo stuff. I hadn't quite fully blossomed into the goth aesthetic yet, but I adored it, and he was really into the goth aesthetic, and he did photography. He did modeling, he had photos of himself. And here's where we get to the point of contention with all the stuff that snowballed. Blaine was a very, very attractive man. And I'm starting to notice that is a thing in common with a lot of these creeps that get away with stuff. If Blaine had been overweight, greasy, sweaty, balding, with the creepy glasses, I don't think I would have, immediately, there would have been warning flags with a lot of the stuff he did. Immediately, if he had been ugly, as one were to say, people would have automatically jumped on his case. But because he was very attractive, he was able to get away with a lot without it even registering. Now, mind you, this was 18-year-old me. An 18-year-old, your brain isn't done developing until you're closer to 25. But 18 is still pretty much a child, okay? You still got a lot of learning to do. I was still dumb at 18, okay? I was very dumb. But that didn't register to me at the time. But 18-year-old lizard brain me sees this beautiful man who's into this fashion style that I'm really intrigued by. I start to get a little bit of a crush on this dude. So time goes on, I become friends with Blaine, and my friendship grows with Daniel. One thing that I can, in hindsight, really notice, and I even started to notice at the time, though it didn't really raise the red flags it should have, Blaine always had a lot to say about young Dan. He would always sing his praises, he would always compliment him, talk about the way he looked, he would talk a whole lot about this 15-year-old kid in a way that kind of weird coming from a 23-year-old man who's just supposed to be his friend. And again, 18-year-old with that lizard brain being upset, hormonal, ooh, pretty man, you're gonna have the rose-colored glasses, you're gonna ignore a lot of the stuff that otherwise be and grown me would really be like. But anyway, it started out not too intense. It was nothing that would really cross a line. So it was stuff that was easy enough for hormonal me to just ignore that, because this very pretty man was giving me positive attention and spending time with me. So it was very easy to just not tune in on that. But things did begin to grow over time. One thing that was a little bit weird that even at the time registered as strange to me was Blaine had this weird obsession with Jeff the Killer. Now, a lot of us had a weird obsession with Jeff the Killer, but when we had our Jeff the Killer phases, we were children or teenagers, not grown adults, okay? And even if you're a grown adult, you can think the character is cool, but I'm talking about fangirl, fanboy obsession. It was always a little bit weird. For one thing, I don't know why he did this, but I remember distinctly he claimed It was his big secret is that he was the actual true author to the original Jeff the Killer story. I wonder if he would still claim to be the original if, like, it aged very poorly and people crap on it all the time now and say it's awful. I wonder if he would still cling to it. But it was his big secret is don't tell anybody. I chose to be anonymous. But he was very weird in particular about Jeff the Killer. Like, he was a little too into him, and he'd get really, really angry seeing people do other spin-off works and stuff, because a lot of the time people would say Jeff was older, they'd make him older, and he'd get really, really angry because he wanted to insist that Jeff was 13. He had to be 13. He couldn't be any older. He had to be 13. I even got a little bit of grumbles with my depiction of Jeff in my comic, which I look back, that's a product from my younger brain. I like the character that I built for him, but that was not Jeff the Killer. That was a character I created. That was not true to the source material. But that's another story. But I did a time jump, and in my thing, I was like, oh, it's an alternate dimension, it's a fan universe, so he accepted because I wasn't trying to say that was the Jeff the Killer, but he had a weird thing. He'd get really angry when anyone tried to make Jeff older. You know, at the time, it struck me as he's just very specially interested in that. That's his thing. But as stuff starts to stack and grow, in hindsight, you're like, so you don't like the idea of this character that you're really into being older. Okay, interesting. Oh yeah, one thing that was also a little bit weird to me is that he would consistently always tell Dan that he needed to cosplay Jeff the Killer. He needed to cosplay. Blaine was really good at sewing. He had worked in a fabric shop and all that, and he was talking about he'd even sew something custom for him, and that if they were able to hang out in person, he would help him cosplay Jeff the Killer. And again, in hindsight, this is stuff that stacks and adds and makes it more and more uncomfortable. This character that you're unhealthily obsessed with in interesting ways. You want your best friend that you're saying a lot of interesting things about to cosplay as this character you got interesting feelings about. Whew, hindsight is 2020. My adult brain is going wee-oo, wee-oo, wee-oo. Like, ooh. Okay, but anyway, so like time continued to pass, and I continued this friendship with Dan and with Blaine. And Blaine at this point had started like really flirting with me and all that. And so like I was, of course, I was flattered, and it made me all the more willing to just not pay attention to the other stuff. Because if he's into me and he's trying to foster a relationship with me, there couldn't be anything weird going on with this kid. He's interested in me, the legal adult woman. That's only a couple years difference between us. That's not weird. You know, we're both grown. That's fine. I was totally misreading all that stuff. It's great. And it got to a point, Blaine was out somewhere in New York, and he had gotten to a point where he insisted that I needed to fly out and come hang out with him and visit him in New York. And that sounded really cool to young me. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna meet this guy, and we're gonna do these photo shoots, and we're gonna get all this fancy goth fashion. It's gonna be awesome. And then a little bit later, he started telling me that he actually wanted to make it a group trip, that he wanted Daniel to come out and visit as well. And obviously, this deflated me a little bit because like I was into Blaine, but I was like, okay, yeah, no, that's fine. We can have a group friend visit. That should be fun. Like, I was surprised that Dan's mom would allow him to go because he's a bit young, but cool. Awesome. It was not awesome. That was the point in which I started to feel a little bit strange. A lot of the stuff that had happened had been slowly over time piling, and I had, you get to a point where even with rose-colored glasses, they're eventually going to start to, like, fog up and get little cracks on them, and I was starting to feel a little bit weird about all this. Like, he just, over time, he just kept up with the weird sayings about the weird vibes, the weird way he talked about, always had to be around. It was a lot of weirdness. It was a lot of weirdness that I didn't initially catch that started to pile up, and then I was catching it all of a sudden. And what finally was essentially the straw that broke the camel's back in all of this, somebody else who, I don't remember their username at the time, but somebody else reached out to me and contacted me that they knew that I was friends with Blaine and was talking a lot with him and all that, and they were just given a friendly little, hey, I just thought you should know, this guy is pretty creepy and worrying. This was before the time before the term problematic really became a thing, but this was a case of something very problematic. They basically came forward and told me that they were only like 15 or 16 years old. They were underage, and that they had, this is back through the time of Skype, y'all. Discord did not exist. Through Skype, they had met Blaine, who they both like to do role-playing. And if you want to RP, that's fine. But Blaine wanted to do a certain kind of role-playing with them. A very explicit kind of role-playing with them, even though he knew they were underage. And them being also a young, underdeveloped brain, they were like 15 or 16, and they were also of a similar aesthetic of me at the time, and they also were like really blown away by this very, very pretty gothic man who wanted to give them attention, and they were just flustered and flabbergasted, and they were like, oh, he wants to role play with me? Oh boy. And they kind of put that aside. The only reason they really realized it was an issue was because their older sister had basically stepped in and was like, no, that ain't right, and sort of had a conversation, explained why it wasn't right. And then they reached out to me. I'm not really sure how all the wheels got in motion for this to reach me, but it did. And I don't know if I have it on my new computer, but I used to, for years, I had these receipts on my computer because they sent me screen caps of their Skype conversation. And oh boy, it was very uncomfortable. They had a role play of some pretty graphic things, but the thing that was the problem, though, the thing that was really the wake-up call that absolutely like slapped me back to reality, he was having them role play this very explicit role play. He had this 15, 16-year-old role playing as 13-year-old Jeff the Killer. And who was he? Was he Slender Man? Was he Masky? Was he any of the other ones that were commonly shipped back then? Oh no. He was himself. I kid you not. He role played, this grown 23-year-old man role played as himself with 13-year-old Jeff the Killer explicitly. And something that I forgot to mention earlier is he commonly said that because he wrote Jeff, he saw himself as Jeff's father. So, seeing yourself as the father of this character and then role-playing like, So that was the moment when reality double slapped me, and I'm like, ooh, that ain't right. Those rose-colored glasses, they crumbled, and I was suddenly, like, rethinking every little thing that had gone down, and the first thing that went in my mind was, oh no, Daniel, like, this is not good. So my first response after all of this was to get on a Skype call and to call Daniel and be like, hey, so this just happened, I'm very uncomfortable, and I've also noticed a lot of the way that Blaine treats you and talks to you, it doesn't seem right, especially considering he had previously been saying, oh, he's almost like a father-like figure to you. He saw himself as a father-like figure to Jeff the Killer, and then he's doing this. That maybe that's not okay. And can you think of anything that would, fit this and make you uncomfortable? And Dan had basically said that, yeah, there were definitely some comments and things that Blaine had made that were a little bit weird and uncomfortable, but he always, just like laughed it away and was like, that's nothing. And then I had basically urged him like, hey, maybe it's a good idea if you distance yourself from Blaine for a bit. This is starting to feel a little bit bad. And Dan, that's when he basically said that there was no way he could do that because he was the only reason that Blaine hadn't harmed himself. I can't say certain things because you do, but yeah, basically, which is another like common behavior that certain type of predators like to do, is they use that sort of language. So basically, Dan did not feel like he could stop being friends or cut contact with Blaine, because if he did, Blaine was going to do something to himself, and it would be all Dan's fault. Yeah, it's going downhill fast, folks. So at this point, I had not known, like, I know that Blaine had mentioned to me him having depression and all that, and that it was his great friendship with Dan that got him through it. This was some of the weird stuff that had always been a little bit weird to me, but this was escalating it to a whole nother level. I didn't know that he was, like, basically making threats of, like, if you stop being my friend, this is gonna happen. So I had to call Blaine and sort of confront him about this, because that was like, okay, I need some answers here. So I Skyped Blaine, I called him when he was available and he answered, and point blank, I asked him, do you have romantic feelings towards your friend Daniel? And this is where I'm mad at 18-year-old me for not having the foresight and the thought to think ahead of time in a way where I could have either recorded this or got this done in text or something that was more permanent, because all it was a voice call that it was just my word against his, because that monster straight up confessed and admitted to me. He just fully came out that I can't hide it anymore. I've always been in love with Daniel. Oh. So at this point, I was pretty freaked out, and, you know, I'm like, okay, whoa, that is a whole lot. That is a lot. And, okay, first of all, why the hell were you flirting with me and acting like you wanted to date me and you wanted me to come out and visit? And that's when he explained that he knew that Dan really wanted to go into animation. He really wanted to get his characters and stuff popular and get traction so he could go do something with his stories. So Blaine thought it would be great if he could get me to like him and then use his influence over me to get me to include Dan's character in my comic and make Dan's character more popular and help basically and act like that, and then use that as something to be like, look what I did for you, Dan. See how much I love you. Don't you love me? And I'm like, this is all this kind of messed me up for a while, because on the one hand, I was like, my heart got played with, and on the other hand, he was trying to use me as a tool to get to a child. And this is part of why I didn't want to talk about it for years, because it really emotionally and mentally messed me up for a while. But, that was too much. I told him, I can't, I gotta go. And he had the audacity to beg me not to tell Daniel any of this. And more specifically, he asked me, because at this point, I had told him, I'm not coming to New York. I'm not gonna associate with you ever again. I can't. I gotta go. He begged me not to tell Daniel that, but he also begged me not to tell Daniel that I was no longer coming or planning on coming to New York, because I didn't know this. I had just assumed it was fine. Apparently, Blaine had worked it out with Daniel that Daniel was only allowed to come hang out with Blaine because Daniel's mother liked and trusted me. And because I was going to be there, she thought it would be a nice social outing, because Daniel was a shy kid and he had trouble making friends, and this was going to be a growing experience for him to be able to go somewhere, be with his friends, and just... it's making me angry. But he asked me not to tell Daniel, because that would mean that he wouldn't be allowed to come anymore. So this grown 23-year-old man wanted this 15-year-old boy to go without his mother's knowledge or permission all the way to New York, thinking he was going to be there with me, keeping him safe, but be there alone for God who knows what to happen. So obviously, I did not obey his wishes, and the first thing I did was tell Daniel. Okay, so I jump on another phone call. I am talking to Daniel again, and I tell him all of this, and I apologize that I have to tell him this way, but it's worse than I thought. Blaine straight up admitted it to me. He said he had these feelings, and it was like Daniel it's like he kind of always knew, but he didn't really take it seriously. It's like he thought it was something that Blaine was just confused because of his depression, and he was just latching on, and he needed his help more than ever, and that he still wanted to go. He didn't want to tell his mom either, because literally he was getting messages from Blaine as we were on the phone, where Blaine was telling him that he was having an especially bad fit, and he was wanting to hurt himself, and if he didn't have his friendship, it was going to be the end. And I'm like starting to get freaking palpitations here, like, child, no. Child, use your brain. Like, please, listen to me. You cannot go. You cannot go. Please tell your mother. And he's saying he's not going to tell his mother. He's going to call Blaine, and he's going to talk to him himself. So he gets off the phone with me, and he calls Blaine. So apparently in this conversation, from what Dan tells me afterward, is that Blaine said he denied confessing to me. That what he had said to me is that he had always loved him like a son. And I was intentionally misconstruing those words because I had confessed my love to him and he had rejected me, and that I was just being spiteful and trying to ruin his life because I was rejected. Which, like, that's so freaking insulting in itself to, like, change the whole narrative and situation. But I'm like, excuse me? And because Dan was so desperate to keep this friendship, this person that meant a lot to him, he was willing to kind of accept this. And that was the point where I hit the rock bottom with the situation in desperation, and I knew I had to do something. And this is the big thing, the main reason why I never told this story, because I felt like poo. But now that I'm an adult, I realize that was absolutely the right thing to do. I found his mom's number, and I called Daniel's mother. So this was back in the day before people really knew how to separate and privatize. People didn't really private much information on Facebook, and I had added Daniel on Facebook. So I had to sleuth it out. This was like a desperate hour. I felt like a crazy person, but I was so scared for this child. I'm like, I've got to find his mother. I've got to find his mother. And again, I had to try and sleuth this out on so very little information. I didn't know the name or the last name. All I knew was the face and voice of this woman, because when we had some like hangout, like video calls, there were a couple times when his mother had come and hung out in video chat with us, and that's how I got to know her. So I knew her face. So I had to literally pull one of these cyber creeper moves, and I had to go through his friends list until I saw the face I recognized as his mother. At which point, I found her Facebook profile, and this was back in the infancy day of Facebook, and at which point she also had her cell phone number listed. And this is the point where, like, again, this made me feel awful as a young 18-year-old, but I used that number, and I ended up giving his mother a call. Now, of course, she was surprised that I had called her because she'd only known me from Skype, but she did at least know me, so she was willing to hear me out. And I basically was really frantic and upset, and I told her everything I was worried about and everything that I had learned. And after I got it all out, first of all, she had thanked me for letting her know, and then she told me that she had always been kind of afraid of this because she had always gotten weird, icky vibes from Blaine. However, she was really struggling. Now, mind you, this was a single mother with her son, and she was trying her best. And every time she would try and talk to Dan about this, he'd get really defensive because, you know, his friend needed him. He wasn't going to be able to make it without him. And she was trying her best, but she didn't want to overstep. She didn't want to basically destroy an innocent friendship, even though that mother gut feeling told her it wasn't right. So she thanked me for telling her, and then, you know, I told her, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to cause any issues. I am just really genuinely worried about Daniel. I'm really worried, and, you know, I just needed you to know. And again, she thanked me and told me that she was gonna handle it, and I had no idea what that meant at the time. So about a couple days, like about 3 days, I want to say, passed where I didn't hear anything from Blaine. I didn't hear anything from Dan. And then I get a really long DeviantArt personal message from Daniel basically telling me that he was no longer going to be allowed to use the internet for a long period of time. His mother had basically told him he was banned from all internet usage for like 6 months or something. Like, no Facebook, no DeviantArt, nothing. He was going to be completely cut off, and he was basically just telling me goodbye and thanking me for being his friend and just saying, how sad he was that he was having to, like, leave and everything. But that upset me pretty greatly, because as an 18-year-old, like, I would have been greatly upset if I had been cut off from all my social media. Like, at the time, to me, that seemed almost like an overreaction from the mom. Like, no, just tell him to block Blaine or whatever. I at the time, I felt like, are you kidding me? Like, no internet whatsoever for that much time? That's crazy. But as an adult, like, I can understand. But as a teenager, I felt like garbage because of that. I'm like, he's going to lose his followers. He's going to lose all this. He's going to lose this. And it's all my fault. I felt horrible. And there's probably some people who are from back the OG in the day who this guy just straight up vanished and nothing happened else with his character. Like, who probably are wondering what happened because he just vanished without a trace. And I'm not going to say who it is, but for anonymity's sake. But this, I hope, if you were worried, this can kind of give you some closure that nothing horrible happened to them. In fact, this prevented something horrible happening to them. But I felt awful, and that's why I never really spoke on it. I carried that with me for quite some time. But so finding that out, I ended up later that day getting a phone call from the same number I'd called. It was his mother. She called to let me know that what he had already told me, that basically he was not going to be allowed on the internet anymore for a big chunk of time, because she believed that that was the only way to protect him, because he was hell-bent on staying in contact with Blaine. And if he had been allowed any sort of internet contact, because I think this was before smartphones were really all that advanced, I want to say, but he would have found a way to stay in contact with Blaine, because he wanted to stay in contact. He would have moved heaven and earth. If he had any way to get on the internet, he would have gotten in contact with Blaine, and it would have continued. So her only option as a mama bear was to cut that off at the pass. Just, no, it's not happening. But she also told me that, because how I mentioned, he was really passionate about animation and all this stuff, and she had somehow found a way to scrounge up the money to get him enrolled in this really cool, competitive animation camp that was several weeks long, something that he never thought he was going to be able to do because the cost of it, because they didn't have a whole lot of money. But she had managed to pull some strings, work some things around, and even though he was no longer allowed to have the internet for the stretch of time, she was trying to make it clear that he's not being... It's not like she's not trying to hurt him or punish him, she's trying to protect him. So rather than taking it away and leaving him with nothing, she was going to enroll him in this animation camp because it meant so much to him to want to be an animator. So that was one thing that he was at least getting that. And then his mother told me basically that because of all these changes, she was going to need to also ask me to no longer stay in contact with any of them. She wanted complete cut from any connection of this community, all this stuff, which, like, at the time, it was hard not to have my feelings hurt a little bit, because I'm like, hey, I'm looking out for you, and you want me not involved. Like, I understand as an adult now, absolutely, you just need to fully clean cut. But she basically had told me that he's saying goodbye to his friends in this community, because it wasn't just me, he's saying goodbye to all of them, and he's not allowed to associate with them anymore. And, you know, I was like, okay, I understand that. However, if this is goodbye, I really, really want to send well wishes to Daniel. So, would it be all right? Basically, at this time, me being in college, I was also taking some animation classes, so I got a newer animation program. So I didn't need the old one that I had been using in high school, an old Flash animation program. And I knew Daniel and his mom didn't have a ton of money, so he didn't actually have access to any sort of cool animation software, except for kind of hard to use, not as great freeware ones. So I basically had used this opportunity to go, you know, I want to send him off well. I will respect your wishes. I won't contact you or him anymore. You know, I that's fine. However, if you are comfortable with giving me an address to send a letter to, I would like to send him my old animation program. And I had basically told her I'd like to send this to him so he can have an animation program to work with at home, because if he's going to go to this camp and learn all this stuff, it'll be great. And if he's not going to have internet, he's going to need something to occupy his time. So I'd like to send him this program, and then at least when he's done with camp and not allowed online, he can put all his time and energy and creativity into building a portfolio and animating. And she was really touched, and she was willing, so she actually told me their address. And this was a big trust thing on her part. It shows you how much she trusted me. And I sent a nice letter wishing him well, telling him that I'm sorry that things had to go the way they did, but that things were gonna go this way for the best, and that he had a bright future ahead of him, and that I absolutely believed he was gonna go far with his skill and talent, and that I hoped that program would help him get there. And then, you know, that was goodbye. And that was the last time I ever got in contact with Daniel. And at this point, I have no idea. I genuinely hope he's gone far. I hope he blasted through that camp and he made an amazing portfolio, and I hope that he got into a competitive school and maybe he's working in a studio somewhere making cartoons and telling the stories he wants to tell. I really hope that came true for him. I really hope, because it's been enough time now. He's an adult now. He's an adult now. But yeah, it's it's a wild tale, and it feels good to have finally told that, because that's something, again, when I was an 18-year-old, I felt really badly about it, because I didn't quite understand things as well back then. Different things meant different stuff to me then. Like, I was so caught up in I destroyed his life. He's not on DeviantArt anymore, and he lost his 500 watchers, and I've destroyed everything. But that was in the mindset of a child, and as an adult, I realized I didn't destroy his life. In a way, I helped his mother save it. And it's still hard for me to, like, it's a weird thing for me having gone through that, but I've got to remind myself that it wasn't me overstepping, it wasn't me being awful, because this kid was genuinely in danger. And, you know, for 6 months losing your access to the internet to get you away from something that could destroy your life, versus, you know, focusing on your career, like, being a kid, all this stuff, I don't know, it was a wild experience, and that's some tea. That is some cold tea. That is from years ago, a long time ago. But I don't know. I figured, you know, it's quarantine, it's story time. It's time to share some stories. I know this is a very, very long one and a more deep subject matter. It got from just being goofy tea to, like, ooh, sis kind of tea. But I figure it's good to share this stuff. We got quarantine. Maybe a long story time is good once in a while. I'm thinking of doing some other story times later on. I'll probably do a much more lighthearted one where I talk about my most horrific experiences. playing D&D because I've had some interesting teammates and some interesting dungeon masters over the time getting used to playing D&D. Those were some stories. I don't know, but you can look forward to more story times. I figured it's good to get back into doing some story times here and there. But anyway, I know this was a heavier story, but it had a happy ending as far as I know. So if you have gone through anything similar, you can feel free to share in the comments below. Maybe you also had to step in to help a friend, or maybe you were the friend that needed to be helped. But feel free to share and discuss in the comments below. But this has already gone on way too long. It is a very long story time, so I'm going to wrap things up now. Thank you guys all for hanging around and listening, and I will catch you all next time with another one. And until then, remember, stay creepy.